I'd like now to introduce our next speaker to you, who is Stewart Swerdlow. I never had met Stewart before this conference, but, well, basically his book, Montauk, the Alien Connection, is really what got him here. That and some follow-up phone calls and discussing it with him. Another extraordinary document, another extraordinary cosmology. Is it one of the truths that are out there? I don't know. It is definitely worth everybody's consideration. It's an extraordinary book, and I think you'll find Stewart to be an extraordinary speaker. Stewart Swerdlow.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob, and Terry also for inviting me here today. And thank you all for coming. It's hard to know where to begin to tell a story about time travel and the Montauk Project, since there's no beginning and there's no end, really, when you think about going backwards and forwards in time. So I was thinking about where to begin, if I should begin with my own background, or if I should start with the project itself, or perhaps with the work I'm doing. And so I decided to start with my very first memory of coming into this existence in this lifetime. Now, most people, when they remember their childhoods, they have a memory perhaps of playing with toys or seeing their mother or brothers or sisters. My very first memory, conscious memory, is as being an adult. Being an adult and then being electrocuted and being forced into a fetus before being born. And I know that sounds bizarre, and a lot of what I'm going to tell you today may be bizarre, but it's my memory, and I urge everybody not to just take my word for anything that I tell you today, but to go out and do your own research and decide for yourself. I think that's very important. I don't like to impose any information on people. My birth itself was very difficult. When my mother went into labor, which was a week late, and went to the hospital, which was in New York City, they examined her and discovered that she had absolutely no birth canal. They said that it was absolutely impossible for her to have become pregnant in the first place. So what happened was, they moved her to a brand new wing of a hospital that wasn't even opened yet. And it was in November, the winter was beginning, and it was very cold. There wasn't even heat on yet in the building. And it just so happened that a doctor from Texas, who was a specialist in this kind of birth, just happened to be there. And so he had to perform surgery on my mother to create a birth canal and then pull me out of the womb. And that's how I was born. And those records are available, they're documented, and anyone who wants to do research can find out about that. From the very beginning that I can remember, I actually have memory of being an infant, as bizarre as that sounds. And I even have memory of being confused about being in that kind of a body, because I had memory of being in an adult body. And you'll have to excuse me, I need some water. This climate's very difficult for me. I just came from a place where there's 14 inches of snow and 15 degrees, so it's a little different. And also I need to explain to you that you have to forgive me if I can't see you very well, because those of you who understand how I see, I don't see physical reality the way conventional people see. I can only see electromagnetic fields. I'm sure you all know what an aura is and what chakra systems are. And so when I look at you and I look at this field of people out here, I see all of your various colors blending together. Sometimes that's difficult for me because I need to then distinguish who is who, and I need to separate the colors. And especially when you're in a large group of people or in a large city, it's difficult to walk through large groups of crowds because I become disturbed by the energies and the colors and the patterns. I also see the geometric shapes that emanate from the mind pattern. In other words, every thought that you have creates a geometric pattern in color. and that is projected out into your auric field. And later on in the lecture, I'm going to actually teach you how to see these things yourself and to experience what I call the language of hyperspace. But going back to my childhood, my very first experience as a child with an alien or extraterrestrial entity occurred when I was 3 years old. I had been in my room. My younger sister had just been born, and during the night, a light came in through my window, and I just bolted awake, but I did not have any fear. The next memory that I have is being on a little gray, what I thought was a little gray car. It wasn't any bigger than a few inches over my head, and I was very small at the time. There was absolutely nothing in this room that I was in, no furniture, no plants, no windows. In front of me was this creature that actually had a kind of a heart-shaped head and blackish green eyes, and it was about my size. To the touch, it felt slimy and even warm, but slimy, and almost like when you would touch a plant in the morning when there's dew on it. That's how it felt. The creature communicated to me telepathically and just told me to follow it. And there was this little ladder going up to another floor, which I did go up to and followed it, and that floor was a dome. Now, to touch it, it felt like metal, but you could see through it. And I could see that we were in the sky, and we were flying very high over the earth, and off in the distance was a string of other craft that apparently looked like the one I was in with domes on top. And it told me it was going to take me on a tour of the earth, which is what it did. It took me from east to west a couple of times, then from north to south a couple of times. It told me there was a reason for this as far as recalibrating my energy field, which I didn't understand at the time. Also, after we had made these several circles of the earth in various directions, the ship accelerated upward very quickly. And I remember falling downward on the floor and feeling the skin on my face being pulled backwards, and also feeling an extreme wave of nausea. When I came out of that, I could see through this dome the earth in the distance. And I need to tell you that in space, you can't see stars. You can only see stars as the light from the stars are magnified through an atmosphere. So when you see these science fiction movies where, like Star Trek, whatever it is, and they're flying through space and there's all these millions of stars in the background, that's really not correct, because you can only see a star when you're relatively close to it. In a non-atmospheric condition, you can't see the light because it isn't magnified through an atmosphere. And actually, that was one of the ways that the U.S. government was able to tell when the Soviet space program was being falsified, because they would show films of their astronauts with stars in the background, and we would know that that was not true and that that was a false film. Okay? And if you want to go back and look at pictures of our astronauts walking on the moon and the Earth in the background, you'll see a pitch black sky with no stars in it. Okay? So that was my first memory. We landed on what looked like a big platform just floating out there in space. And the next thing I knew, I was being taken inside this platform. And in there, it was kind of like a scene from the Star Wars movie at the bar when they had all these different alien beings around and they were just, you know, talking to each other. But these beings were like sitting behind this panel, behind this desk. And there were various different types. And I was given information from each of those types relating to the DNA codes that that species had donated to the Earth. They told me that the Earth itself was a project, that no life here would have existed without their intervention. They also told me that the very first colonists on this planet were reptilian in nature, and that they were the ones who claimed this planet for themselves, since they were the first one here, and that they donated DNA to create humanity, as well as the more humanoid types that also donated DNA. How do we know that we have reptilian DNA within us? At the base of your brain is a small little section that's called the reptilian brain. And that is the fight or flight reactions that you have. It's the instincts and basic survivals that are generated from that part of the brain. Also, the fact that your skin peels and wrinkles and sheds just like a reptile's would do is leftover proof that we have the genetics of reptilians. We also have, of course, human genetics. And I was told that in this particular galaxy, about 70% of the civilizations are humanoid in nature, and another 25% are reptilian in nature, and the remaining 5% are a mixture of all kinds of things. And then I was brought back to my room, and of course, I was quite disturbed by it. I developed nosebleeds. And from that point onward, my eyesight shifted. I was able to see auras around people, but I could also see their physical beings. I could see their physical structure as well. I need to go back into my family history to tell you why the government would have been interested in me personally. My great uncle was the first president of the Soviet Union. His name was Yakov Sverdlov. And many of you who know perhaps Russian geography have heard of the province and city of Sverdlovsk, which is located in the Ural Mountains. The province is still named Sverdlovsk, but the city has been renamed to Yekaterinburg, which was its original name before the Russian Revolution. That is where the Tsar and Tsarina and their families were executed, unfortunately by my uncle's orders. And that is why he became the first president of the Soviet Union. But, of course, I did have nothing to do with that. While I was growing up, especially between the ages of 5 and 14, I did experience occasional, what has come to be called abduction scenarios, the typical kind that you've heard of, where you wake up and you're in another place and there are other beings working on you and probing and looking into the body. I don't want to dwell on those because I'm sure you've heard a million stories about that and read a million books about the same type of experience. So what I want to get into now is how I became involved in the Montauk Project. How many of you have heard or read about the Montauk Project? A good portion of you. Okay. And I'm sure many of you have heard lectures and seen videos by Preston Nichols and Al Bielek and perhaps Duncan Cameron. Okay. Well, again, the story is bizarre. The Montauk Project was an outgrowth of the Phoenix and Rainbow projects from the 50s and 60s, which were involved in controlling large masses of people and the manipulation of political systems and even religions. As the population of the Earth grew and various political differences occurred, it became very apparent to those who were in charge of this planet that they were going to have to figure out a way to control large groups of people, because police forces and armies just wouldn't work on billions and billions of people. There just aren't enough soldiers to do that. And they started testing subliminal messages through music and the radio waves and even in the movies. And if you remember back in the 50s and possibly the 60s, when you would go to a drive-in movie and they would show you pictures of soda or popcorn, people would run out at that moment and get it because there was a subliminal message put into that film that made you want to buy that. Okay? And eventually that was outlawed, at least officially outlawed, and they tried through other methods of sending subliminal messages. In 1970, there was a derelict Air Force base on the eastern coast of Long Island. And I have to step down to put on the overhead to show you this. And also, you have to forgive me about the overheads. I left my original set in Switzerland, and I just had to recreate them here. So just please bear with me. It's not really a bad map, is it? Okay. This is a map of Long Island, and I'm number 1 out here. This is, sure. How's that? Is that good? Okay. This number 1, this area right here, is Montauk Point. It's located about 120 miles east of New York City, which is off to the west. This area here, which is number 2, right here on this northern coastline, is an area where Nikola Tesla, in the earlier part of this century, had a very large laboratory with a very vast underground complex. It was here that he created many electromagnetic devices and tested them. In fact, there were times when he blew out the electrical systems in the area, and there were many calls to the police. He also had a laboratory in southern Manhattan Island, which back in the early 1920s, he built a coil device that resonated very strong electromagnetic waves. What happened was he turned it on, and it started to vibrate. And it kept growing and growing and growing. It started to be like a step-up transformer using energies from non-physical environments. It grew so strong that the whole building started to shake. And eventually the whole street and the neighborhood started to shake and actually was producing an earthquake. He couldn't turn it off. This is a very important point, that he could not turn it off, because that will come in a little bit later. Eventually, the police were summoned. They broke into the laboratory with axes and clubs and literally broke apart the equipment to stop it. If they had not done that, New York City wouldn't exist right now. It would have been completely destroyed in a major earthquake. In fact, it's very possible that he had activated, by doing this, some fault lines in the area, because it wasn't long ago after that when they started to put in subway tunnels in the 14th Street area, where they broke through a cavern and discovered a massive fault line opened up under Manhattan, which hopefully will remain stable, because if that were to open up, the entire island will collapse. Number 3 on that map is the Brookhaven National Labs. How many of you have heard of that? Last night? What did you hear about last night? Oh, okay. There are many experiments going on out there. Okay. There are tunnels that connect the Tesla lab to the Brookhaven National Lab. Now, back in the late 70s and early 80s, the state of New York decided that they needed to appropriate that land because it was a national, I won't say a national treasure, but let's say a landmark because of the Tesla laboratory. What they decided to do to mark that occasion was to start building a nuclear power plant on the area. Okay? Even though everyone in the area begged them not to. They continued to raise taxes, not only in the Long Island area, but for the whole state, to fund this nuclear reactor. What they did was to actually open it up, contaminate the reactor with nuclear power, and then shut it down and decommission it. So what we have now is a nuclear power plant, completely sealed up, off limits to the public, sitting right over the old Tesla laboratories and catacombs. So you have to wonder what kind of logic they had to do that, to contaminate an area with radioactivity just so that they could seal it off from the public. Okay? Now, and just as an aside, I want you to see something. Right here, in a direct line, is where Flight 800 was destroyed, right here. Also need to know that that is also the site over which the Swiss Flight 101 passed on its way to Nova Scotia in Switzerland last year. Same flight route. Another tidbit of information. This little island right here, that's called Plum Island. How many of you have heard of that before? Okay. Am I repeating something? Okay. Okay. So you know what Plum Island is all about. That is about genetic manipulation of so-called viruses and bacteria and also animals. Now, here in the Southwest, I know there is something that rodents carry called hantavirus. Is that correct? Okay. It's unknown in the Northeast. But a year and a half ago, perhaps 2 years ago, someone on the eastern end of Long Island died from the hantavirus, from an unknown source, because we do not have any rodents. First of all, there are no rats on Long Island. And there are, well, not animal types anyway. And there was an unknown source of the hantavirus, and that person died. Another one became infected, and they covered that up very quickly. Apparently something escaped from Plum Island and came to the shore. You cannot go to Plum Island unless you are a government employee with a special pass. This area, Suffolk County, New York, which is the eastern part of Long Island, starting approximately here and going east, is a hotbed of government experimentation and also microwave towers and UFO activity. Now, some of you may have heard a few years ago an incident called the Moriches Bay incident, where a UFO was actually shot down. How many of you have heard of that before? Okay, that occurred, guess where? Right over here. This was a very large triangular craft which was seen flying over Connecticut, heading southeast towards Long Island, followed by a very large string of black helicopters. Now, as it passed over Long Island, there were certain scientists that were waiting for it and transmitted some kind of an electromagnetic signal that made the craft come down into the bay. The craft was then taken by helicopter. Now, this was a very large craft, almost the size of a football field, that could be lifted by just a few helicopters and taken away from the scene. And they spent days combing the area, picking up all traces of the craft or even their own being there, and told us later on, first of all, they said nothing happened. Then they said that there was a criminal on the loose. And then they finally said, well, a Russian satellite that was leaking nuclear waste crashed in the area and we had to seal it off. Okay. But there are eyewitnesses to the craft itself, and there are people who couldn't get back to their homes because it was sealed off. And guess where the black helicopter's base is located? Right here. Right over here. Okay. All in line with Montauk Point. Montauk Point is infamous on Long Island. In the earlier part of this century, it was a hotbed of smuggling, especially during the bootlegging era and Prohibition. It's also known even today as a way that smugglers bring in drugs to the country. And it was also a playground for wealthy people and summer vacations. And so it was kind of isolated, being so far from New York City. You could only get there by train or car on one road, which is called Montauk Highway. And the interesting thing about it is that the Indian tribe that lives near there or on there is called the Montauk Indians. Their language and physical features are different than all the other Indians on Long Island. In fact, it can't even be traced to any other language group of Indians. Geologically, Montauk Point is a mountain. It's the top of a remnant of a mountain, of a string of them that go down, and we think possibly led to where is now Atlantis. It is connected to the rest of Long Island by a sandbar, which is a very narrow strip, very vulnerable in hurricanes and bad weather. And so it was kind of an isolated area, even back in 1970. Back in World War II, German submarines were seen coming right up to the coastline of Montauk, submerging, and not seen again. My question is, why weren't they stopped? Where did they go? And what were they doing? From my experience at Montauk Point and the project, there were many German scientists, I believe perhaps left over from World War II, that were brought to this country to enhance the project. As you know, the Germans during World War II were very much interested in upgrading humanity for a super race, and also had no problems in experimenting on people in order to find out what certain results would be. When I first came to Montauk Point, there were groups of children between the ages of 3 and 15, I was 14, that were being used in the experiment. There were other young adults who were up to the age of even 30 that were used in the experiments. What they did was instill fear, anxiety, and frustration through torture and various other heinous methods. And they would put you in a room approximately the size of this stage, and in each corner were large cylinders. In the middle was a table where the victim was strapped down and tortured. These cylinders on either corner of the room somehow absorbed the energy of the fear and the anxiety. It was downloaded into computer programs so that it could be transmitted through satellite and ground tower transmission to a population to see a reaction. Understand something. Fear is a great method of controlling people. If all of you in this room were terrorized by something, and I said, I know the way out, you would follow me because you would hope I know the way out. Okay? If you were happy and content, you wouldn't do anything. So understand that fear and terror is the perfect form of conditioning of a mind in order to control it. It opens up these areas of the chakra system, the crown and pineal gland, and even the heart chakra, so that information can be input. That was one of the major projects going on there. That was for mind control. And what they do is, you know that there are sine waves coming out of your brain in a certain pattern, and they would simply beam in a related pattern that followed the same line of the sine wave, so that you would think you were having your own thought when in fact you would be thinking what they told you to think. I have to tell you also that there was a lot of disinformation given out to the public about aliens and about the government connection to them. It was designed to make you believe certain things, to make you believe perhaps that aliens were here to help us, to upgrade humanity, all of that information. And in fact, I have never heard of an alien group that was here for our own good. My opinion is, and also the opinion that I was taught by the government, is that any alien that is here is interfering and has no good intentions. The problem is that their technology is better than ours. We learned a lot from the Roswell crash in 1947 because there was a lot of information and technology that we learned from. And I'm sure you've all heard about how that technology was given out to corporations so that we could develop our own version of it, including Velcro, microwave, transistors, digital equipment. All of that came from that crash. We subsequently found out that we didn't really shoot down that craft. It was sent down. It was kind of like an information packet so that we would have an idea of what's going on. In that craft, we also found vats of human blood and hormone material, which we didn't understand why that would be on that craft. But that's one of the reasons humans and cattle are mutilated and abducted, because one group of aliens, and I tend to use the word aliens instead of extraterrestrials because they make a difference. Aliens are physical beings who come from another world, extraterrestrials can be physically or non-physical borderlines. They're kind of interdimensional in nature. And the government does make a distinction between those two types. They were designed, what you would call these 4- and 3-foot grays, genetically by another race in order to watch this planet and prepare it for something. If you were to take the face of a human fetus and put it next to the face of a gray, there'd be very little difference. The gray race was actually developed out of human genetics. They really are not alien in nature, but very much part of humanity. Now, what their intentions are is a little different. Now, I'm just going to turn this off for a second. In order to explain fully about Montauk Point, I need to go back to 1943 in what was called the Philadelphia experiment. How many of you have heard of that? Okay. Now, the movies that you've seen on television are really just hyped up information that wasn't exactly like that. The Philadelphia experiment was designed to cloak naval ships and aircraft so that they could not be seen attacking foreign countries. What is not known generally is that the United States government and the German government on a very high level were actually working together, and that there were actually German observers at the Philadelphia experiment. They used Tesla electromagnetic equipment that would create a field around the ship to create invisibility. Of course, as an experimental type device, they really weren't familiar with it. They should not have used human beings on the ship when they turned on the devices. Human genetic structure and molecular structure is not designed to go into a hyperspace level. Now, how many of you have heard that term hyperspace? I need to explain what it actually means. It has nothing to do with Star Trek or, going at warp speed, all of that. If you consider physical reality an analogy as if it were the yolk of an egg, the shell around that would be comparable to the astral levels that you also have heard about. Okay? The astral level actually contains the physical reality within its shell. Outside of that shell is an area of no time and no space, an area of pure thought and mind. That is hyperspace. In this realm, you can travel between any point instantaneously. Every point in time and space has a particular vibratory rate, a resonance, which is unique to that point in time and space. If you can match an object to that particular rate of vibration to where you want to go, there will be an instantaneous connection. Because in hyperspace, there is no distance, there is no travel, it's instantaneous. That is how many alien craft work. They're able to vibrate it to a particular rate, and that's why you see them beeping in and out, making right-angle turns, doing all kinds of things like that. It's because they're hyperspatial in nature. And so human beings and the craft that they had back in 1943 were really, are still not designed to do that. Of course, they didn't know that when they flipped the switch. What happened was, it created the electromagnetic field around the ship, and it was thrust into hyperspace level. Human beings or conscious beings with conscious mind pattern have no point of reference in hyperspace. And so there's confusion and disorientation. Solid objects become like liquid. You can pass your hand through an object. You can think of something and it will materialize in front of you. Not solidly, but the image of it. When this happened, the electronic equipment did not function correctly. It went haywire. They couldn't get the ship to come back. Now remember the Tesla equipment in the early 1900s that could not be turned off. and had to be destroyed. That's exactly what they had to do at the Philadelphia Project. When the ship went into hyperspace, there was panic. Some people jumped overboard. Those people, some of them, disappeared forever, and some wound up at Montauk Point in 1983. You may have heard that story. That's connected to Preston Nichols, Al Bielek, and Duncan Cameron, and for that detail you can go read their information. When the ship was in hyperspace, they had to destroy physically the equipment. They started disconnecting wires. They tried to destroy the equipment and turn it off. When that happened, the ship became physical again, except that any unfortunate person that was leaning against an object or standing on something that became solid too quickly, and their arms sunk in or their legs sunk in, they materialized inside the solid object. There were people who appeared with their arms stuck in a wall, with their body halfway through a floor, etc., etc. Those people had to be killed because they could not extract them, and their pain was excruciating. There were others who survived physically, but their minds became insane because they had no point of reference of what they had just experienced and could not relate it to the physical world. Many of them wound up in hospitals, many of them actually in Northern California. Now, I recently met someone in Oregon who was associated with a clinic near Reno that is specializing in helping people from that time period and from the Montauk time period to readjust to society. I myself wasn't even aware of this until earlier this month. This person also was a high-level courier for the U.S. government in the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and actually told me that he had seen documents on Montauk Project way before any information was ever published. And this person is a verified government, ex-government employee. I had seen his documentation. And he is going to provide the publisher, hopefully, with information that at some future point will be published so that you can have it as well. Montauk took the children, created the fear in order to boost the mental signal of the psychics and mentalists that were used in the control area. Now, how many of you know about the function of the psychic Duncan Cameron in the Montauk Project? He was the master psychic because of his abilities to be hooked up to the computer equipment to generate vortices, thought forms, etc. What they found was that nothing is really more powerful than the human mind. Mind is everything. Mind is what hyperspace is made out of. For lack of a better term, you can consider it God mind or universal mind, whatever you prefer to call it. But it permeates all creation. All thought forms come from there. And so, he was hooked up to this chair. There were adjuncts or children that were used to boost his signal through fear, and he would create openings in the time-space continuum. What they were trying to do was map points in time and space so they knew what those resonance or vibration rates were so that they could travel back and forth in time and space. What does this do, though? If you go back in time and you alter a timeline, or you create an experience that shouldn't have been there or wasn't there originally, you create a split in the timeline. You create an alternate reality, which splits at the moment of a different activity. That's what Duncan and the others did in this experiment. They went back in time to prehistoric time. They went forward in time to, I believe, the year 6500, where there was a dreamlike state. There were no people around. And then they were able to map this. Now, I was told, and I can't confirm this, I was told that in our original timeline, the Germans won the war. They had craft that were being developed called vril craft. You may have read about it in the Montauk information. That were superior to anything that we had. In World War II, you may recall the Foo Fighters that would pass our planes, okay? And we believe those were the German experimental vril craft. What Montauk did was to actually go back in time and alter reality so that the Germans lost the war. So what we have is a split timeline now, very close together, kind of like telephone wires that you see wrapped around each other, okay? Where there is our timeline that we now agree on as having won the war, and the other timeline of the original events where the Germans won the war. There are bleed-throughs between the two. And that is why we still have mind patterns associated with that Germanic period, neo-Nazis and that kind of a thing. Now, do you remember what symbol the Romans used to use on the top of their staff? It's an animal, an eagle. What is the symbol of the United States? And what was the symbol of the German, not Third Reich? So, three empires, global, trying to be global empires, with the same symbol. That's not an accident. The same group that's trying or vying for global control has existed for thousands of years. Only the names have changed. Only the methods have changed as technology advances. It's the same group. And that's the group that was behind the Montauk Project. Now, they also were interested in genetic manipulation. They were interested in creating a new phase of humanity. They knew that all life on Earth was created through alien intervention. And so they needed to recreate humanity in their own pattern, their own ideas, to circumvent any intrusion, further intrusion by alien manipulation. What they tried to do was bring human mind into hyperspatial awareness. And that's what I had been under in the experimentations. Because of the electromagnetic waves, because of the microwaves, and because of the other electronic equipment that was used, my eyes were blinded so that I cannot see physical reality the way you do. Also, my hearing is very much diminished, which is why, if any of you speak to me personally, I sometimes have to lean forward or focus on you. And even though you do have beautiful faces, that's not why I'm leaning so close to you, because I'm trying to hear what you say. Also, I had for many, many years constant internal bleeding that could not be determined, the source, although I know that it was my entire digestive tract. I was diagnosed with ulcerative colitis, or possibly Crohn's disease. And they wanted to do surgery and explore further in there, and I refused to allow that to happen. I figured I lived so long with the bleeding and I didn't die, so that I'm just staying that way. And through my own efforts, my own mental conditioning and healing techniques, the bleeding has stopped for the last 6 months. So I believe I know how to do that now. One quick question. As part of the experiment, I was sent overseas continually. I was sent to the Middle East, to Central and South America, to Europe and the Caribbean. And my purpose was to infiltrate UFO groups and to learn what they knew about extraterrestrial and alien activity. I was also supposed to monitor certain areas of foreign governments to find out what they were up to. And I was away from home a lot. As a result of this, I had to be constantly programmed and reprogrammed. Every time I was sent somewhere, I had to be programmed to learn how to speak that language, how to deal with the culture, and become actually like a chameleon. And that's what I did for many years. I did that for almost 25 years. As a result of that constant programming and reprogramming, I kind of became a very withdrawn, depressed person. I tried to commit suicide 3 different times. I became an alcoholic. I started to smoke. My marriage broke up. I wasn't a very nice father to my children. And I also need to tell you that my children are also the result of this experimentation. There was a program in Montauk called the marriage program, where they would connect 2 people with certain type of genetics together so that they could create a new prototype of an advanced nature. And so this is what I experienced in my early 20s. And the result of that was a child, which I am still in contact with. She lives in Connecticut, and I cannot mention her name from her own request. She's 17 years old now. She has very strong abilities, but doesn't want to use them. But the interesting thing about her is that the pupils of her eyes are diamond-shaped. They're not the same kind of eyes that regular human beings have. And she tries to hide that by using contact lenses over the diamond-shaped pupils. And this is on record in a hospital she goes to in Boston. Everything that I'm telling you medically can be documented. And all the places that I have been to can also be documented. Now, even my other children, my son, my oldest son, has an optic nerve that comes in through the sides of his eyes. According to the ophthalmologist, he should not be able to see the way the optic nerve comes in. And yet, he has very good vision, better than mine, and also he is able to see auric fields as well. Whether you consider it fortunate or not, all of my children have abilities which go beyond the normal. Now, they don't really care for that because it kind of makes them stand out, but they don't discuss it with anyone either. Of course, my ex-wife doesn't like this at all, and she keeps them away from this kind of material. And that's unfortunate because it stops their growth. What I'm trying to do is to teach people how to open up the 90% of the brain that isn't used so that they too can see hyperspace. Why would I do this? If you want to stop mind control, if you want to stop genetic manipulation of humanity, the only way to do it is to have control of your own mind. Mind creates everything, and I'd like to show you a diagram of that. Can you see that? Without, I don't want to lose the words. Okay. This is basically how physical reality works. Physically, thought emanating from hyperspace. This is where your soul personality exists. And I don't use just the word soul, I use soul personality, because there are oversouls from which come many personalities. You are one personality within an oversoul. And it's a thought band. That thought band is magnetic in nature. It attracts atomic structure as it enters into physical reality, like a magnet, attracts atomic structure. That atomic structure creates the protein sequences that form DNA. And the DNA is the blueprint of your body. So quite literally, what you think is what you are. If you have a thought pattern that is incorrect, negative in nature, and you don't correct it at that point, it degenerates into an emotion. If you don't correct it at that point, it becomes a physical manifestation, whether an illness, accident, circumstance in your life, what have you. Only at that point, when it becomes a physical manifestation, you treat the symptoms rather than the mind. So you're curing yourself of the symptoms, but you still have that thought pattern. It's going to return. And each time it returns, it gets stronger and stronger until you finally remember that you have to take care of the mind pattern. Now, how does this affect the medical industry? Well, it's in their best interest to keep you sick, because otherwise they make no money, right? If they make you well and they treat your mind pattern, you won't be sick again, okay? So I hope there's no doctors in here, but even if there are, it's the truth, okay? So this is how it works. Mind creates everything. And what I want people to learn is how to use their mind. You only use 10 to 15% of your brain. So what happens to the other 85 to 90%? That's the language of hyperspace. That's where the symbols, which I call archetypes, enter in and create your existence. They appear in color, and they have a tone. Every shape has a tone. You've all heard the term music of the spheres, okay, generally referring to the sound of stars and planets, etc., and how they move. But also, the atomic structure and the DNA pattern has a tone that goes along with it also. What Montauk Project tried to do was alter the thought pattern so that the DNA would ultimately change. This is kind of what they're trying to do in the HAARP project. Now, you all heard of the HAARP project. Perhaps someone has spoken on it earlier in the week. Yes? Okay. HAARP, H-A-A-R-P, which is the High Frequency Active Oral Research Project, which is located in Alaska, and there's also a related project in northern Norway. Okay? Now, what the original intention of that project was supposed to do is to create an electronic web or field in the ionosphere around the Earth to protect the Earth from incoming signals that may affect human mind patterns, alien or extraterrestrial. The side effect was, with the day that they turned it on, 7 states here in the West lost their electrical power. I don't know if you remember that. Okay. It also changed the electronic makeup of the ionosphere and lower atmosphere of the Earth, rendering some aircraft inoperable, or actually in danger. If you remember, a year or two ago, 737s were falling out of the sky, and no one knew why. Okay? That's because they were not recalibrated to the new electronic fields in the atmosphere. And I believe it was about a year ago, maybe a little bit less, they grounded all the 737s, all at the same time, and they said they had to do something to them, to recalibrate them. Okay? And then they let them back out in the air, and now they seem to be okay. That's what the HAARP project did. It also sends out a frequency at the same hertz level that affects human mind pattern and DNA production. In effect, changing your DNA structure. Well, that's the question. Is it better? Someone asked if it's better or worse. That's what they're trying to find out. They don't know because they didn't expect that side effect. Now, some people say they did that on purpose. My opinion is they really did it to try to protect the Earth from what's coming in here, but they had a side effect. Also changed the weather patterns. Most of you know, no matter where you live, in the last year or so, the weather has been very strange. Winter is not winter, summer is not summer, storms may be very strong. Okay? Also want you to take note where you have seen school children shooting other school children, as has happened in the West and the Midwest. Take note and go back and do your research that either shortly prior to, during, or shortly after, there were terrific storms in those particular areas, including tornadoes, violent windstorms, etc. That was the result of the transmissions from satellite of ELF to the Earth to activate certain mind patterns within human beings. Aggressive mind patterns, reptilian mind patterns that exist in the base part of your brain. The result was children murdering other children. Okay? Associate that, look back into the records, and correlate that action to the weather anomalies in that same area. You will see a connection. This was an outgrowth of the Montauk Project. They're learning how to fine-tune the transmissions so that they can put in a program easily and just have whatever they want done. It's an activation. They want to have at least 2 billion people activated as soon as possible. Activated under their control rather than alien control. I'm sorry? Implants is a completely different story altogether. They really don't need implants when they can control your brain waves. Okay? They can control your DNA simply by turning on an electromagnetic device in Alaska. They don't need to have you implanted. That's old technology.
But this morning on CNN to have a new device now for diabetes, and it gives you a little chip you stick in, and it gives you measuring blood sugar every is what they're expecting, but then it will be put out information every so often.
And
That's the new chip that should be for diabetes.
And isn't that wonderful that they're going to do that for diabetics? And then in New York City, they're also going to implant all little newborn children so that in case they're ever kidnapped or lost, we can just activate the chip and find them. Okay, isn't that wonderful? I think that's really terrific. Did any of you ever see Star Trek? Any of them? The ones that contain the Borg? What are the Borg? They're physical beings implanted with technology. And that's what they plan for you. Okay? Sorry? Yeah? Well, that's another thing, which I know someone earlier this week had discussed, as someone mentioned the word soul catcher. Someone mentioned, and I forgot what speaker it was, about when you pass on not to go towards the white light. Correct? Yes? That's actually true. There is alien technology that scans for those who are passing on and turns on an electromagnetic hyperspatial device that attracts their soul energy into that white light and tunnel. The true light is a golden light. Okay? Now, the type of people who would be conducive to going towards the white light, they've been generally targeting drug addicts, alcoholics, people who have been very ill and filled with narcotics for a long period of time, whose minds are confused and not balanced. Okay? Which will lead me to my next section. That's who they're targeting as an experiment. Hopefully none of you will pass on in the near future. But when you do not go towards the white light. Okay? White, now listen to me very carefully, and please don't be insulted by what I'm going to tell you, those of you who've been studying certain things for many years. In the 1960s, the government started a disinformation program with regard to alien contacts and with regard to the energy fields of the human body. They needed you to believe certain things so that you could be easily controlled. And unfortunately, I know about it because I was involved with all of that. Now, white light, raise your hand if you surround yourself with white light. Yeah. Let's use this area as an example. You live here in the desert. In the summertime, it's really hot and bright. What colored car do you want to be in? Why? White, why? Reflects heat, reflects energy. You surround yourself with white light, you are deflecting your chakra colors, and you will die. If you hold white light around you for an extended period of time, you will deflect away the accurate colors of the chakra system, and you will die. Those of you who've had experience to see visions of people who have passed on, or visions of angels, which can be legitimate, what color do they usually appear in? Because they have no living chakra system. They have white light around them. If you want to join them, surround yourself in white light. Okay? That is a disinformation from Uncle Sam, as well as other places. Can't blame the U.S. government because government is really a puppet of something else anyway. Okay. Sorry? What is the thing that's behind it all? Well, it's been called New World Order, Global Elite, whatever you want to call it. There's a core group of people that control all the resources of the earth and need to control large masses of people. And the only way to control them is through fear and disinformation. Okay? Now, I want to show you the proper colors that the human body should be surrounded by. Oh, one other thing I want to show you. You can think of this as how the technical end of it works. Your thought is like film. Your brain is the projector, and physical reality is the screen. So if you don't like your reality, you need to change the film, and the film is the way you think. That's why I teach mind pattern analysis. That's why I teach the language of hyperspace that resonates with mind pattern. Okay. You can only see in your physical reality what you have put in your own thoughts. If someone else puts something in your thoughts, you're going to see that. That's what the Montauk Project also was about, to change your thought pattern so that the film in your projector has a different movie showing. Okay? Many of the apparitions, whether it's Virgin Mary, whether it's aliens, what have you, many of that is psychically transmitted through satellites, targeting certain groups of people, targeting different cultures to see what filter they have and how it comes out. By learning that, they learn how to fine-tune the transmissions, so that ultimately they can develop a transmission which is global in nature. That's also why it's so important to have a global society. If the culture is global in nature, there's just one kind of mind pattern film that needs to be projected out. Does that make sense to you? Is that a better way of controlling billions of people? You don't need an army, you don't need a police force. You just have a little chip in there, and that chip can amplify the signal. Okay? There's also going to come a time, and it's already starting, where they're going to ask for your DNA sample. That's going to be on a little identification card that you're going to carry around with you, so that you can't buy anything unless your DNA on that card matches your thumbprint or retina pattern, etc. That's all, again, starting again in New York City. Only they're going into the prisons, and they're getting DNA samples from all the prisoners, so that when they're released, they will know if they commit any more crimes, because they'll have their DNA on record. Okay? That's just the first step. Someone asked if there is ELF being transmitted through the TV. It's transmitted through your TV, through your radio, your telephone, your computer, your microwave oven, anything. Even if you are not on the telephone, your phone can be used as a transmission device. Any electromagnetic device can be used for transmissions, and it is. Okay? Now, I would like to do an exercise with you, if that's okay with you. I want you to see how to open up that unused portion of your own mind so that you can see for yourself. Do not take my word for anything, but you learn for yourself how you can see this, what I'm telling you. Okay? I don't believe in people standing up here and telling you all kinds of things, and then you go home and maybe it's right, maybe it's not right. Well, this way you see for yourself. I'm going to give you a couple of things to do, like a classroom, okay, where you will learn for yourself how to see into hyperspace, unlock your own genetic codes, and unlock your own mind patterns. Is that okay with you? Okay. Now, before I even begin with that, I want you to understand how the human brain is set up, and many of you know this already. There's a left and a right hemisphere of the brain. The left brain is where your personality or ego is centered. All of your thoughts pertaining to physical reality emanate from there. It's the logistical side. On the right side is the emotional, creative, and spiritual side of the brain. All thoughts pertaining to non-physical existence emanate from there. In between is the pineal gland. It acts as a balance between the two hemispheres of the brain, so that your thought process is not to one extreme or another. Schizophrenic people or bipolar syndrome people have an inactive pineal gland. They exist on only one side of the brain at a time. There's no balance. Okay? The medication they take knocks both sides of the brain out anyway. Okay? So, again, treat the symptom, not the cause. I'm going to teach you now how to see your particular balancing symbol. All human beings have one of three types of symbols. If you could see auric fields and archetypes, symbols that emanate from the brain, there's one of three types that you have. They're called T-bars. It is a geometric shape emanating from your thought pattern, from the pineal gland, that acts as a balance between the two hemispheres of your brain. Now, note one of these shapes, neither one is any better or worse than another. Okay? It's simply a question of genetics. Just like blonde hair and red hair and brown hair really have the same function. Doesn't matter really as far as the color. Same thing with eyes or the height. It's a matter of your genetics. So what I'd like you to do right now, and I guess we can dim the lights for this, is first of all, take a couple of cleansing breaths, deeply in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. Close your eyes, center your consciousness at the pineal gland at the center of the forehead, and simply look to see what's there. Don't be upset if you don't see anything. It will take practice, but simply look and see what you have there. It may help you if you surround your forehead with a royal blue color. If you need help, surround your forehead with a royal blue color. When you see it, you can then become aware of the room again. Raise your hand if you were able to see your particular T-bar. Okay. It's not bad for a start. Okay. What you need to do every morning before you get out of bed and every evening before you go to sleep is to visualize that T-bar at your pineal gland and make sure that the arms of the T-bar are completely perpendicular. If they're leaning to one way or another, if they're bent, mentally straighten it out. That will balance the thoughts between your left and right hemispheres of your brain. It will also regulate the hormonal flows in your body, especially if you have high blood pressure or diabetes problems. They'll help regulate all of that, and then it will keep you in a very balanced mood and emotion. If for some reason you cannot see your T-bar, It's just difficult for you. Visualize a circle with a dot in dark blue or royal blue. That is the symbol or archetype of the pineal gland itself. If you could see organs in people, that symbol would emanate from the organ of the pineal gland. All you need to do then is just center the dot in the circle. It will have the same effect as balancing your T-bar. Okay? Right here. Yes. And the so-called third eye. Okay? That's where it comes from. Okay? Now, if you have a balanced T-bar and a high-functioning pineal gland, it is very much difficult for anyone or anything to enter in unbalanced thoughts. It's a form of protection for you. Now, understand, in the aura or the electromagnetic web that surrounds your body, there are the chakra system that generates the colors. And there are 7 main centers, as you know, from the root all the way up to the crown, which are really nothing more than nerve ganglions that have an energy and color associated with them. It's where bundles of nerves come together in your body. It's scientifically there. Okay? It's not anything mysterious. But there is one color that is never taught, whether it's New Age or metaphysical. It's never taught. Now, whether you consider it fortunate or unfortunate, I can see colors. That's what I see. And so I know what is common to humanity and to the planet Earth. The lowest layer around the Earth, which is the gravity field in the atmosphere, has the color brown on it, in it. That's what it is. That's why tree bark and sand and small animals that crawl on the ground and soil are all brownish in color, because they're resonating with that energy field. And so do human beings. That's not an alien, and it isn't my outline either. Okay? But if you could see the natural energy fields of human beings, you would see this layering of colors in the body. Now notice, the area which is the one most ignored is the largest area. From the bottom of the feet to the top of the thigh, this area resonates with a brown color. It's the color of gravity. It's the color of grounding and balance. You need that. Someone who has a balanced T-bar and has grounded themselves, it's very difficult to control them because they have been centered and balanced. Okay? This is a form of protecting yourself. Now I want you to notice at the crown, the color resonates in violet, not white, not gold. It's violet. Okay? Notice the colors as you go up and the areas that are associated with them. What I suggest is that every morning before you get out of bed, even while you're lying flat, to visualize these colors in these areas from brown up to violet spinning around you. That's what I call chakra spinning. Now listen, it's as if you were in a tube of color or a cylinder of color. It's supposed to be in and around the body, not just outside, but inside and around in these areas. And when you wake up and you decide how to spin, it's either clockwise or counterclockwise. It doesn't really make a difference as long as you keep that same direction all the way up for that day. The next day, you may decide to do the opposite direction, and that's okay, but keep it again in that direction for the whole day. Always spin from the bottom up and never from the top down. If you spin from the top down, you'll actually turn off your energy field. Okay? Start with frown. Mm-hmm. How many of you work with anything like this? Yes? Now there's also a system out there which really disturbed me to see. And that system showed a body with a vortex coming in this way and another one coming out the back the other way, like funnels. And they told you to spin that way. What that will literally do to you is create a hole in your energy field. It'll open up pathways for things to be entered into you. This information on purpose. This seals you, that opens you. Okay? Would you like to try to do this? Okay? It doesn't matter if you're sitting, you can still do this. Just put your feet flat on the floor and put your hands to your sides and take a couple of breaths in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. Start from the bottom of the feet to the top of the thigh in brown, spinning, either clockwise or counterclockwise. Choose your direction. Then from the top of the thigh to the pubic bone, you're going to spin in pale red, same direction. Now from the pubic bone to the navel in pale orange. From the navel to the bottom of the rib cage in pale yellow. This is your solar plexus area. From the bottom of the rib cage to the collarbone in medium green. Green in hyperspace is the color of oxygen. You are oxygenating your entire system. From the collarbone to the tip of the nose is ice blue. From the tip of the nose to the top of the forehead is in royal or dark blue, but not navy blue. And finally, the crown is in violet. Once you've achieved this, check on your T-bar, make sure that it's balanced, and then you can become aware of the room. How many of you had a problem doing this exercise? Okay, I did it fast because I don't have much time. Sorry? Shut down your T-bar? I'm sorry, I can't hear you. You don't shut down the T-bar. I'm sorry, I cannot hear you. Maybe afterwards we can come up with questions and you'll ask me that. I can't hear you, I'm sorry. No. Did I say shut down? No, I said check on your T-bar. Check on your T-bar. Make sure that it's balanced. There's no way to shut, it doesn't shut down, it's there. Okay? I'm sorry if my mouth was dry and sounded different than what I intended. Okay. But that's how you spin your chakra system. It recalibrates and resets your energy field so that you become strong in those areas. Anyone who uses brown and balances their T-bar has a less chance of becoming controlled. Anyone who uses violet at their crown chakra seals in the energy and less chance of any entries, especially negative ones. And here's something for your daily life. If ever you become traumatized or upset in your daily life with any experience, simply surround yourself in brown and that will ground you. Try it in the next few days and see how you feel. In Montauk, we noticed that there were shifts in color when we went back and forth in time. The past was more associated with a green color in the energy field. The future was more associated with blue. And the present was associated with brown. It was a grounding safety net that pulled back to the present time period. And so, I suggest for you, whenever you do visualization exercises or meditation exercises, that you always end them by surrounding yourself in brown to balance and ground you and cut off any negative experience that you may have brought with you. So you can also try that for yourself and see how it works. Well, I always encourage visual aids. If for some reason you cannot see a particular color, then use something of that color until you become good at seeing it mentally. Surrounding yourself in brown, you may use a brown robe, or you may use a towel, whatever you need as a visual aid. And there's a company in California, which I have to get the name of, I forgot it right now. They make glasses of each of these colors so that you can see through that glass into that color until you become mentally proficient at it. And then you can just close your eyes and be in that color. Okay, so I encourage visual aids of anything that you need to do the work. Okay? I also encourage you, anyone who does this kind of work, to keep a dream journal. Most human beings sleep 7 to 8 hours a day. That's a third of your day. So that if you live on an average of 75 years, you will have been asleep for 25 years. Okay? That's a quarter of a century of being unaware of what's going on in your life. Now, the dream symbols are just as valid as your waking state. It's simply a question that the rules and regulations in the subconscious mind are different. But the life is one life. So I encourage you also to keep dream journals. And as you do so and you progress with the work in hyperspace and this kind of a language, that you will see your own geometric shapes and learn how to decipher them and understand what's going on in your mind pattern. Now, I would like to teach you very basic language of hyperspace, kind of like Hyperspace Language 101, to give you a little bit of a foundation so that you understand what I'm talking about, and that as you do this work and you receive other symbols, you can learn to decipher them. Well, I'm not putting it higher for a reason, because I want to give you some homework there at the end. Okay? This is a very, very basic dictionary. In hyperspace, these symbols mean these English words. Hyperspace is not to be spoken. It's mental transmission. In fact, there are many, if not most, alien and ET civilizations that communicate with this language of hyperspace. How many of you remember the string of pearls that hit Jupiter a few years ago? I think it was in '93. Okay, there was 94, was it? Okay, and so when this so-called comet broke up and was hitting Jupiter, NASA was receiving symbols of hyperspace language being transmitted from the pieces, and that had to be deciphered. Now, each of the symbols, if they were in different colors, refine the meaning. For example, I told you that green means the past. So if you see this symbol in green, what would that mean? The past. Okay? If it was in blue, it would mean the future time. Okay? This is the symbol of a human being. If I saw this in red, what could that possibly mean? An angry person. Okay? That's how you refine the meaning with the colors of the language of hyperspace. So there, I don't know if you can see this, I'll try to raise it even further. Here's your first hyperspace sentence. Anybody want to try to translate that? You never paid attention in school, did you? So what could that possibly mean? Human beings are perfected through the awareness of physical reality. Well, how did you know it was left to right? Could it be right to left? If that were the case, what would it say? How about this? How about this? Physical reality creates an awareness that perfects human beings. Okay? Learn how to be creative with the sentence in English. It's difficult to create a coherent English or any other language sentence out of hyperspace symbols because they're not meant to be spoken. Okay? Here's a clue. When you do your visualizations or meditations and you receive a sentence of 4 symbols, that means that you are getting the information from your genetic code. Remember, DNA is made out of 4 proteins, sequences of 4 proteins. As each of those proteins ignite and give off their symbol, they will create a sentence of that particular set of instructions. That's your DNA software. That's telling you what your programming is. If you receive a sentence of 3, it represents conscious, subconscious, and superconscious. Those are the 3 levels of human awareness within the mind. A sentence of 3 means the information is coming from your mind pattern. Crop circles are made out of archetypes. Many of the crop circles are simply archetype paragraphs. Each of the pieces need to be separated and translated. It would also be best if they could be filmed with Kirlian photography to get the color of each of the symbols that will refine the meaning. And that is the best way to decipher them. So I do encourage you to start perhaps your own dictionary of the language of hyperspace. Get your own symbols. In this book, which many of you have seen out there, is the Healer's Handbook. And in here is a pretty extensive dictionary of many of the different symbols that I have accessed over the years, not only myself but other researchers. That book also contains the color information to refine the meaning. I also teach in some of my seminars how to unlock your genetic codes, your DNA. There are visualizations, exercises that we can do that will unlock your genetic codes. It's quite an extensive project if you decide to do it, because there's millions of codes within you. Okay? But it's kind of like a tissue box, where you pull out one tissue and another one comes up. Well, when you do the exercises to open up your genetic codes, the first available one is there. Once you open that up, the next available one will come up. It's in sequence, so that you really can't go to the middle of the tissue box and get the middle tissue without going through the others first. Okay? Does everyone understand this? Okay? If it's new to you, it's very different. Okay? And maybe some of you aren't ready to or willing to learn that, and that's okay. It's simply a question of learning how to protect yourself and understand who and what you are and why you're here. Now, there's something very special that I'd like to do with you, because a lot of this information came from working with dolphins and dolphin frequencies. Because when dolphins transmit information to each other, they transmit it in color and in the language of hyperspace. The chirping that you hear underneath the ocean is simply their sonar, which is reflecting off of the objects so that they can find their way in the ocean. But there is something that I call dolphin frequency, which uses a symbol that enables you to get into their mind patterns. Now, just because I give you the symbol doesn't mean you're going to get in there. They have to accept or reject you. But it gives you the opportunity to learn how to access another level of your mind. And it doesn't matter if you're in a desert or in a mountain or by the ocean. This frequency can be used anywhere in time and space. So let me show you that. If you break down the meanings of the symbol, this top part is the symbol for sonar. The bottom part is the symbol for water frequency. The two together represent the dolphin frequency. The dolphin frequency code color is always in this dark blue. And I talk people in through this visualization to help them access this frequency. And I would like to share that with you now because it's a very powerful experience, and it's something that you can then go home and do on your own and develop entire bits of information to find out about yourself and who you are. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to put you through one more visualization. Okay? And again, you put your feet flat on the floor. Take a couple of cleansing breaths in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. Memorize this symbol. Look at it and memorize it. And then place this symbol, close your eyes, and place the symbol in dark blue at your pineal gland. Continue to slowly breathe in through your nostrils and out through your mouth. And visualize the dolphin frequency symbol at the pineal gland in the dark blue. Simply observe what you see in your mind. It may help to focus on the dot at the center of the sonar symbol. If you do enter the frequency, look at your body as you enter the frequency. What does it look like? Carefully observe what you see in front of you. If you do see dolphins, what color are they? What color are their eyes? You can mentally ask any question that you wish. Remember to breathe in through the nostrils and out through the mouth. When you feel that you would like to come out of the visualization, remember to surround yourself in brown completely. Check on your T-bar to make sure that it's still balanced. Take a couple of cleansing breaths, and then you can become conscious of the room at your own discretion. Raise your hands if you're back. Just a couple more seconds for those who aren't. Thank you. Raise your hands if you did manage to enter into dolphin frequency or had some kind of an experience. Wow, it's a lot of you. Okay. Did anyone notice if Their bodies look different in this state. Okay. Did anyone, sorry? Yeah, okay. Did anyone notice, did anyone see any dolphins? Yeah. What color were they? Okay. And what color were the eyes? Mm-hmm. Crystal color. And also, did you ask any questions? And did you receive any answers? Okay. This too becomes another project for you if you decide to do such a thing. And I also suggest you keep a separate journal just on the dolphin frequency visualizations, because there are many people on the Earth that actually do have dolphin DNA within them. Okay? And dolphins are very highly intelligent species which are not native to this planet, but are also very benevolent. Now, if you receive information from a very high level, it's very possible that you will see the dolphins as if they were violet or gold with violet or gold eyes. Then you know you have accessed a hyperspatial level of the dolphin frequency. If you see them in the blue-gray color, then you are accessing the physical reality dolphin itself. You may actually be accessing a pod group mentality. Okay? And then you may want to ask where they're located so you can see what direction your mind has taken on the Earth. Okay? So this is a very powerful exercise. Any of you who have difficulty sleeping, by doing this exercise at night as you're trying to fall asleep, breathing in deeply through the nostrils and out through the mouth, using the dolphin frequency symbol in the dark blue color at the pineal gland, you will fall asleep very peacefully as you enter into the dolphin frequency. It's very safe, and it will help you regenerate your body and your mind. Again, remember always, when you come out of it, to put yourself in ground and center yourself, balance your T-bar before you become conscious again of your surroundings. Very important. Okay? So, let me turn this on. This language that I've offered to you, very briefly actually, it's really the tip of the iceberg, is a perfect interspecies method of communication. Many of you who have had experiences either as abductees or contactees, whatever the case may be, may have received symbols during some of these experiences that you couldn't explain. You may have seen colors with the symbols that didn't make any sense to you. You need to write them down and to decipher them. Then you will understand what the message is. Most of the beings out there are nonverbal in nature, and they access communication through this method. There is direct communication between the pineal gland. Many abductees report that they're always touched at the pineal gland area with a wand type of device. And that really is to open up this gland in order to receive mental communication of a hyperspatial derivative. When you dream, when you go out of your body at night when you sleep, you are traveling in that level. And you are staying in pure mind. When you return to your body, the symbols, the archetypes, have no point of reference with the conscious mind. So the subconscious mind creates symbols and scenes around the archetype that you call dreams. A tree could be a T-bar. The symbol for space could turn into be a lake. And so it's very important that you understand what's going on in your mind pattern. Now we have only a few minutes left. I would like to open up the floor to questions and answers because I really would like you to understand everything that you may have heard today. And I believe that there's microphones there.
Hello?
Yes.
I got a couple of questions. First, a comment. Last night I was accused of being an ad man for movies, but it's my only frame of reference. And you mentioned the Philadelphia Experiment and movies that have come out about it. Have you seen the Philadelphia Experiment Part 2?
I saw that, yes.
Yeah, it does absolutely have to do with the alternate universe where the Germans won the war.
Yes.
And I found that very interesting. Another film that came out in the early or mid-'80s called From Beyond. It's a very bizarre horror film that involves resonance frequencies to activate the pineal gland so that you can see, bizarre things from another dimension. It's a very strange film. And people who were affected by this frequency, their pineal gland grew, and it moved around. And sometimes I can feel my pineal gland. Like even when you said the word, I literally felt it. Like even if you put your finger just an inch away, sometimes that's just enough to get that tingling sensation in that third eye. Is that a real phenomenon? Is there something going on there?
Yes.
That feeling that something's been activated?
Ultimately, humanity is headed for a time when the left and right hemispheres of the brain will merge into the pineal gland, and actually your brain will be a gigantic pineal gland. That's the ultimate goal of humanity. Okay, because that is the organ that accesses the physical and non-physical environment and acts as a translator between the two.
Fascinating. Another brief question. You said avoid the white light aspect of either the near-death experience or the dying experience or the energy experience. And then you mentioned the kind of light that we want in any one of those experiences or for self-healing. I think you said golden light. Can you touch on more of that, please?
Yeah.
Thanks.
What I said as far as that's concerned is that, first of all, surrounding yourself with white light will actually dissipate the natural colors of your chakra system, and eventually you will pass on. There's alien technology which, when someone passes on, entices them to go towards another type of light. What someone mentioned is a soul catcher. That really does exist, because if you know about certain types of beings, especially little gray ones, they don't have a soul personality per se. They're kind of like little automatons. And so they trap soul personalities to enter them into bodies that they have cloned as their own race. And so it's best when a person passes on to look for a golden or a violet light, because that is pure hyperspace level and will access the correct pathway. The white light will be enticing them towards another direction.
It's one thing, Dr. Swerdlow. Yes?
Just Miss Stewart is fine.
I just one thing crossed my mind that past 20 years, missing children, many thousands children. Just crossed my mind that something to do with, you mentioned earlier that children experiment, and I just wonder who somebody did the investigation for this.
It's very true. Many of the missing children in this country were using those type of experiments, and they will never be found again. Not at Montauk. I can't speak for any other area, but Montauk is no longer doing that. Montauk is now involved in weapons research and weather changes. Yes.
Well, it's very good talk. I too see around people's minds, especially out about so far, geometric forms. I've never heard anyone mention that. I see them, but what the heck do you do with it? I don't know how to interpret it.
Yeah, well, that's why I suggest looking at the dictionary and the Healer's Handbook. It is, from what I know, the most extensive dictionary of the symbols that emanate from the mind pattern. Also, keep your own dictionary and use your own discernment to decide what those symbols mean.
Also, I'm on a ship most of the time, and there's one room I go into, and when we're observing beings on planets, there's all these geometric patterns around the beings. I guess that's a DNA coding, is it?
It could be from the mind pattern, it could be from the DNA, it could be from many other sources, it could be from technology. You would have to decipher and look at the colors to decide where they come from.
Thank you. Very good.
Could you expand on the point you brought out about growing bipolar schizophrenia in relation to these various technologies being used? I've heard allegations just, in the margins about growth of bipolar disorder, and things like that because of some of these technologies.
Yeah.
Is that documented? You know, is there sources you can go to read more about that? One point. And then the second point, if you do feel, because I've felt certain times in certain areas that, like I'm picking something up, sometimes your mind just goes, slows down and gets foggy. And I'm wondering whether, because some of these are around some military installations, or alleged underground facilities in certain, one area. The question is, if you, the idea is not surrounding yourself with white light. Would you advocate, if you feel like there's something, you're being, or there's some kind of radio transmitter or something, what do you surround yourself with?
Okay.
Rainbow light, brown light, etc.?
Okay, let me explain. As far as going to the first part of your question, the bipolar syndrome, you're absolutely correct in that there's an increase in this. Why? Because turning off the pineal gland prevents balancing of the mind pattern and therefore accesses control issues within the human being. So you are going to see more bipolar or schizophrenic conditions as well as multiple personality disorders. Okay? That's not only from mind control but can also be from psychological reasons within the person. Okay? You always have to look at the conventional first. And then I worked with a lot of people in mental health agencies, and I noticed that the medications that they're being given purposely shut off not only the pineal gland, but the connections from the pineal gland to the left and right hemispheres of the brain, in effect shutting off the person from actual physical reality. And then what they do is give another medication that actually makes them weak and foggy, and they can't even pick their heads up, and they just spend their days either in bed or shuffling around, completely oblivious to everything. Hopefully that's not what they have in mind for humanity, because they need people to work. They don't need people to be mindless like that. Going to the second part of your question, as far as protection is concerned, even whether you feel bombardment or not, it's always there. Best to surround yourself in an egg-shaped bubble with a larger part on the bottom. On the outside of that egg shape, you put mirrors facing away from you so that anything coming towards you is reflected back. And inside the egg shape where you are, you fill with violet light. The violet acts as a filter so that anything passing through the mirror will be filtered before it gets to you. So that's something that you can use as a protection around yourself at all times.
Was your famous Soviet relative the reason that you got involved in the Montauk Project? And if not, why and how did you?
Well, that's kind of a yes, no, maybe, I don't know. My connection to the Soviet Union did target my family in the United States, especially during the Nixon era, as being monitored where the loyalties would lie. My paternal grandmother did return to Europe during World War II as a Soviet spy, but understand at that time the U.S. and the Soviet Union were on the same side. And that is one of the reasons that my family was involved in that kind of work. My father was also interrogated by the U.S. Army and was actually working in West Texas and New Mexico in secret projects to this day that he will not discuss. I don't know if that answers your question.
And, well, you were brought into it then at the very
young age. Yes.
Youngest age?
Yes.
Were you given a reason for it, or they just sent you there?
No. Well, there were several reasons. One of them involved my genetic material, and the other involved my family connection.
Is there something about Russian genetic material that interests them, or is it your personal familial genetic strain?
The answer to both sides of that question is yes, especially for the U.S. government. Eastern European genetics, especially Russian, has a Tau Ceti influence, okay? And the beings from Tau Ceti were working closely with the Soviet Union at that time.
Thank you.
Hi, I have two questions. Question number one is, and this is very interesting that you are here, because I have been researching and I have read something through my research, which has been repeated several times, that and since your father was involved in the killing of the Tsar,
My great-uncle.
Your great-uncle, in the killing of the Tsar, and this I found in Freemason books, that he and the group who were with him actually killed him alive, and they cut his heart out while it was still beating, and they drank of the blood and ate of the heart, so that the energy of the Tsar and the lineage would go into theirs.
I really don't know about that. I couldn't answer that question because that's the first time I've heard of it.
Well, it is in several books. The other thing is, I think this would be a tremendous, tremendous opportunity to make some major changes in our society. And one is, you're talking about the T-bar.
Yes.
That it will help, that it helps to balance.
Yes.
This information is very ancient, and I think it's time that we quit associating the swastika with being an anti-Semite, because the swastika actually represents the balancing of the spiritual, the material, and the little notch represents change, which is eternal in the universe. And the swastika, as well as the cross, the T-bar, is in over 100 nations of this planet. And so why can't we just start talking openly about the swastika without fear of some ADL member coming to our door and knocking us down?
Well, just let me comment on that. And you're correct in assuming, it's correct that the swastika was an ancient symbol.
In many nations, over 100.
Right. That did involve not only balance, but the movement of the major four elements of the earth: fire, air, water, and earth, something like that, that spin around to create physical reality. So, and they also represent the four proteins of the DNA. So you are correct. Unfortunately, because the Germans have used that as a national symbol during the Third Reich, it has had negative connotations. And it may take many generations from now until that negative connotation has dissipated.
But we can stop it today, because the Germans were not the only ones involved. The Khazarian Jews were also very involved in starting World War II. And Einstein allowed the Philadelphia experiment to take place and allowed these beautiful people to die when Tesla said, "I will not go ahead with it." And a few months later, he was killed.
Yeah, that's the truth. But unfortunately, it's not the scope of this lecture.
Hello.
Yes.
Can you describe more about how to recognize when your DNA is
Can you
dolphin?
please speak up?
Yeah. Can you describe more about a person's connection with the dolphin whale DNA and how they would be able to recognize that themselves?
Using the dolphin frequency. Understand that dolphins are a form of whale also. They're related. And during some of my classes, I do have people actually move into a whale-like frequency rather than the dolphin. It's simply a question of the nuances of the genetic coding within that person. Okay, so to answer your question is, the person has to research for themselves using the basic symbol to see what area is strongest for them. There are some people more in tune to the whale frequency, some more to the dolphin frequency, but they're really related. Okay, they're really like the two sides of the same coin. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Yes.
Okay.
Also, I've heard in the Montauk projects that a lot of the spiritual sexual energy was used to open portals to dimensions in time and space. How does one use that with their own consciousness to open portals to their own future selves or higher selves in that sense?
Well, actually, I have some visualizations in the Healer's Handbook that describe something of what you're speaking. I don't suggest that people try to do this without some kind of teacher or coach on their own, because it could activate areas that they shouldn't get into. Okay? Very often many people are trying to activate a Kundalini energy. It's very important to realize that that could be very dangerous. There are people today in prisons and in mental hospitals who have opened their Kundalini energy and can no longer function in society. You can also develop severe illnesses and die. So you need to do it gradually. Your genetic code is programmed to open sequentially and timed also. So it may not even be in this lifetime that you need to open up the Kundalini energy. Your descendants may be doing that. Okay? So it's not a good thing to enforce or push. But I do encourage the study of opening your genetic codes as I had discussed, so that you take one little piece at a time and recognize what the symbols mean.
Thank you.
I would like to ask you, are you familiar with Sedona
Yes.
in Arizona? Is there, because the earth is a little brown in some parts and reddish, does it have an influence, you think, if you do meditation there, or did you find anything?
It happens to be a very good grounding and balancing area, and that's why there is such a flocking towards it, because most people are unsettled and unbalanced, and they do need to create a grounding for themselves, and that area does attract that.
Mm-hmm. So there is a special advantage then when you...
There are areas on the earth. The earth is a living entity as well, and it has areas correlating to human chakra systems, only it's not called chakra systems on the earth, they're vortices or vortex. And so there are certain areas on the earth which correlate to certain chakras in the human body. And in fact, this year, we are taking people on chakra system tours to various locations on the earth to open up those particular centers if they need that. And if you're interested, there are some brochures on the table back in the vendor room where you can look at that.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have two questions, both related to your birth.
Yes.
You said your first conscious memory was as a person being electrocuted and then being put into the fetus. Do you know who that
Yes, his
was?
name was Johannes von Gruber, and he was sent here from Berlin
specifically for that purpose?
to observe the Philadelphia experiment. Very much in line with the other lady said before, the people who engineer wars and problems on the earth really do so without regard to national borders or race. They just have to, they're trying to realign mind pattern or acceptance of certain realities. And so on all at very high levels, all of governments work together for the same goal, even though they may have their differences for the population's sake.
Mm-hmm. The other question was if you can tell us the name of the doctor who delivered you.
I would rather not say that unless I had permission.
Hey, Stewart, great talk.
Thank you.
Two questions. One is about the possibility of the implant that's many abductees report being placed up to the roof of their mouth, up into their skull. I'm wondering if that implant, if you know, affects the pineal gland, and for what purpose, if possibly it could destabilize the communication between the hemispheres and or affect your ability to access your T-bar. And the second question has to do with the use of the white light that many abductees report beginning their abductions of blinding white light.
Yes, the implants that are reported to be placed in the upper sinus cavities definitely have an effect on the pineal gland and are designed to inhibit its use by the person itself unless activated by an abduction. And as far as the white light is concerned during an abduction, that is the same technology used when a person passes on to trap their soul personality.
A few years ago, our 22-year-old son, Tim, got hit with a motorcycle on a car back in Wisconsin, and the moment he got hit, his wife somehow knew old Tim had a touch of bad luck. Now, how in the heaven's name did that get 2,000 miles west? We live in Portland.
Understand.
And explain it kind of, I'm not too smart, so...
I think you're very smart.
Okay.
But actually, there is no time and space. In actuality, it's an illusion. And so in that hyperspace level, all mind is connected. And so if your wife were to pick up this signal from her own child, which is a very strong connection, obviously, it would transcend time and space. There'd be an instantaneous connection because she is attached to his frequency emotionally. She resonates with that same frequency rate, so there is no distance between them mentally.
Oh, and that's why he didn't get through to me.
Possibly.
Excellent talk.
Thank you.
I just have a comment to add to the issue of swastika. that, of course, it is being used in many places, but I just want to know, probably you know that, but for the audience as well, that the word swastika is a Sanskrit word, and it is a holy sign amongst Hindus in India even today. And swastika means, translated, it means, may it be good. It's a benedictory term that we use, and that is why, I guess, Hitler borrowed it, because he wanted everything good for his Aryan supremacy and all that. And according to him, that was probably the only land on this earth that was still following some ancient Aryan traditions, as we still do.
That's
I
correct.
just wanted to share this.
Thank you. Actually, it's the reverse of what the Germans used.
When did you decide to become a teacher? Why did you decide to become a teacher? And why aren't you afraid of your own personal safety in doing this?
I'm asked that question all the time. And the point is that I have had problems with my personal safety. My car, the gas tank of my car has been tampered with to explode. My ex-wife was run off the road a couple of times. I've had dead animals, drains of blood placed in front of my door. All of these things have happened. The truth of the matter is that they want to see what happens to me. Less than 1% of the people involved in Montauk actually survived, and of that 1%, very few survive in society. Not that I'm doing so well in society, but it is something that they need to observe, and I think they want to see what happens with me and my teaching and how it's accepted.
You partially answered the question that I have about the implants, but Dr. Roger Lear spoke this week, and he showed pictures of implants that they had removed, and I was struck by the fact that T shape, and with your diagrams of and the T shape in the pineal gland, regardless of where they are placed in the body. Do you see a connection between that shape and whatever is attempting to be controlled?
Yeah, the shape is a conducer or a transistor, in effect, that balances energy from physical and non-physical realities. So when they transmit energy to the implant from a non-physical source, it then gets translated to a physical source, and there's an activity that results from it. That's why the shape is important in that manner.
There were two shapes that they removed. The other he described as a cantaloupe seed, which would be the other thing.
Those are usually tracking devices.
Thank you.